This episode is sponsored by Amy Wangard. The Amy Wangard Group is proud to serve Northeast Ohio and all YSU alumni. Ranked 15th out of more than 10,000 realtors across 27 counties, Amy and her team deliver trusted, professional real estate advice for your most significant investment. Through exclusive programs designed to simplify buying and selling, they offer solutions you won't find anywhere else, helping clients move confidently at every step. Their goal is to maximize your value and provide a smooth, stress-free experience that turns your dreams into reality. At the Amy Wangard Group, clients become family, and every home is a new beginning. Learn more at amysguaranteed.com. Again, that's amyguaranteed.com. The link will be posted in the description. All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Penguin Nation Fans Podcast. As always, I am your host, Gino Leone. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Whitetown Nation. And don't forget to check out my written work over on Richard Sports Today. I have a couple of quick announcements along with sort of a fun episode. If you guys follow Sam Herder on Twitter, by the way, shout out to Sam. He does excellent work covering the entire FCS, breaking down all the offseason storylines. If you guys want some team preview content, I believe there are a couple of Missouri Valley team previews over on herosports.com. He's phenomenal. He's the go-to guy in FCS coverage. But I want to talk about something before we get into the announcements I have. I want to sort of break down what Sam talked about in his early preseason top 15 after listening to the podcast episodes he posted, the article he released on his website. There's some interesting narratives building within the FCS media, the national media, that I feel like is not giving proper justice to some of the teams that are outside of maybe the Dakota schools or some of the teams in general, like a team like North Dakota, that I think preseason are being underrated. Now, of course, this could be somewhat wishful thinking, given that I'm a YSU Penguin fan and I want YSU to be a national contender. But I think if you really look at the rosters and how they stack up with each other, I don't think the difference in the gap is that large between this tier 1 and tier 2 of teams that has sort of been the narrative building in the FCS national media. But before we get into some of the quotes I pulled from that and looking at how Montana State, the top preseason ranked team, stacks up to YSU heading into the next season, I have a couple of quick announcements. I'm not sure if I have talked about this on my podcast, but my former X account, Penguin Nation, was hacked or compromised, whatever you want to call it, about 2 weeks ago. I have a new account up on X. It's at Ytown_Nation4. That is all lowercase. A couple of people have been kind enough to promote my stuff on there once again. YSUPL. Shout out YSUPL for promoting my stuff again and getting some more people to follow me there on X. I put this out on Instagram that my account was hacked and compromised. I also put the information for that new account on Instagram. So if you have troubles listening and retaining information that I just said 2 seconds ago, go on Instagram and follow me on X and get my stuff down. The second announcement is that I have launched a newsletter. It's called the Penguin Nation Weekly. And the idea of this entire newsletter is to sort of expand my reach within the YSU community. I know some people aren't as active on social media and would really appreciate getting some daily news about YSU. And I think it's going to be awesome to do that because it's sort of my own platform where I can channel conversations. I can control what I want to control. And I'm going to post some unique stuff on there. I posted an article today breaking down the blueprint behind YSU's last two off seasons, breaking down some inside information that I have, some people that I've heard from, and what it sort of looked like the last two off seasons for YSU. So make sure to go check out that Substack. That information is posted on my new Twitter account. It's posted on Instagram. And I really like how it has gone so far. And I think that could be something that could really expand my reach because I believe, I've talked about this before, that it's super important to make sure that YSU has the best media coverage in the entire FCS. We have some phenomenal student athletes. We deserve the best coverage possible. This Substack is sort of just another way to expand my news sources and give you guys some more versatile options and some more creativity with some of the content I produce here on the podcast. Without further ado, let's get into this debate about Montana State versus the field narratives. As I talked about, Sam Herder released his early 2026 FCS preseason top 15. Shout out, by the way, preseason top 15, preseason top 25s. Those can take a lot of time to research, a lot of times to establish. I appreciate how transparent Sam is because there are a lot of other voters in the FCS who are too scared to post their ballots and aren't transparent whatsoever. So when it comes to casting ballots that matter, in terms of voting for certain awards like the Walter Payton Award, you probably know how the main media guys are going to vote, like Sam Herder, Zach McKinnell, Timothy Rosario, those type of guys. But when it comes to some of these other voters who are just ghost, you have no idea what their opinion on FCS football is. For Sam, I appreciate how transparent he is, and that's something that's very relatable to me because I like to be transparent with my work when covering YSU, when covering the Valley, and I really appreciate that effort that he makes. But he makes some interesting quotes here that I want to talk about and sort of counter him on that I think will generate a lot of discussion here on this podcast. So let's read these quotes, and then I'm going to give you guys sort of my 2 cents on where I stand with this. So the first quote says this: as I look ahead to the 2026 season, I am fascinated by a strong group of Tier 2 teams. The top heaviness of the subdivision won't change this fall as Montana State has a loaded roster coming back from its national championship team, and there are only 1 or 2 legit challengers, it seems on paper, to Montana State's throne. So Tier 1 is small as it has been in the FCS for the last 10 years, but Tier 2 is very interesting in 2026. And then when he breaks down Montana State's roster specifically, this is what he says: this looks like the most complete FCS team we have seen since the dominant 2023 South Dakota State squad. Pause. We need to take a breath right there and sort of digest what he is saying here. If you guys do not follow the FCS landscape that closely, or you don't remember the 2023 season, that South Dakota State team preseason looked absolutely unbeatable, and they ran the table against everybody. There was not a single game on that schedule for South Dakota State where I felt like South Dakota State even had a remote chance of losing. That was one of the more dominant runs to a national championship throne we have ever seen in South Dakota State. And no offense to Montana State and what they've built, but they barely beat like the 5th place Valley team in the national championship game last season. Illinois State obviously peaked at the right time, caught lightning in a bottle, whatever you want to call it, and they were a good football team. But let's not pretend like this Montana State team is South Dakota State in 2023. I just think based on what they have coming back, the numbers they put up last season, sure, are they the clear-cut favorite to be the number 1 team? Absolutely, but this is not like a North Dakota State type team when they're at their peak. Like, I feel like something that's being undervalued and undersold within the FCS national media landscape is the fact that North Dakota State leaving opens up so much parity in this league. It's so important to emphasize how dominant North Dakota State is. And no offense to Montana State or Montana State fans. I doubt any of them will actually tune into this podcast or anything, but you guys have sort of been North Dakota State's little brother and the Dakota School's little brother. Even last season, Montana State lost to South Dakota State in the regular season. And I know there's sort of a different narrative building with the fact that South Dakota State got blown out in the second round by Montana, which is a Big Sky team. So maybe South Dakota State isn't able to compete with Montana State at the top of this thing next season. But I just think that's sort of ridiculous. If you look at some of the injuries they had and when those key players came back, they only had one game to get their chemistry and get their timing back up to speed before they had to play Montana. You know, if Montana and South Dakota State played earlier in the season when South Dakota State was healthy, you know, they got off to that 7-0 start, I think we're talking about a different story. But to me, I just don't think the gap between Montana State is that large where we're saying, oh, it's Montana State versus the entire field. To me, that's just ridiculous. And since this is the Penguin podcast, we're going to compare the rosters between Montana State because I think there are some very interesting points that can be made here. So for Montana State, the offense is loaded for Montana State. I'm not going to deny this. Again, I think Montana State is going to be the number one team and probably is going to remain the number one team throughout a good chunk of the season. So let's start here with offense. MSU returns its starting quarterback, back-to-back 1,000-yard running back, top 3 wide receivers, top tight end, and 3 full-time starting offensive linemen. That's a ton of production. I love Justin Lamson at quarterback. He did a phenomenal job last season of taking care of the football. He threw just 3 interceptions, which is really good. And I love that he values possessions, which is something that you want in a quarterback. On defense, the Bobcats have to replace their entire starting defensive front. That's due to graduation. And then their top 3 cornerbacks, the linebacker and safety positions are loaded for the Bobcats, which gives them a nice core in terms of setting things up pre-snap with those linebackers setting the front. That's going to help those new guys that come in on that defensive line. But I have a hard time believing they'll be as good up front as they were last season. That was a pretty good unit for Montana State up front. They were able to be disruptive, had a solid rush defense. I sort of have a hard time believing with that much production gone that they're going to be as good up front on the defensive line as they were last season. Cornerbacks, interesting. I think they have a couple guys that I'm high on there. I'll be sort of intrigued to see how that works out. But to have that nice core at safety and linebacker, that's always a good sign for a team that's trying to go back-to-back. For YSU, let's compare the roster here. YSU returns the Walter Payne Award winner at quarterback, their top running back, 6 significant contributors on the offensive line, and top 2 tight end options. And then on defense, the big question heading into 2026 for YSU, the Penguins return 3 of 4 starters on the defensive line and 2 significant contributors at linebacker. New defensive coordinator, Ryan Riemedio. So let's zoom out a bit. Let's get really detailed here and specific when comparing Youngstown State to Montana State. And I know if any national media members tune into this, they're probably going to call me crazy to compare Youngstown State to Montana State because they just don't consider the fact that Youngstown State could emerge and that there could be a team outside of Montana and the Dakota schools that could actually rise up. So let's compare YSU's offensive line versus Montana State's offensive line in 2025. Montana State, now keep in mind, Montana State played 3 extra games because they made it to that national championship and won. Montana State allowed 32 sacks, which ranked 62nd in the FCS. Youngstown State, in 13 games, allowed 17 sacks and ranked 21st in the FCS. I don't know about you, but I have a hard time believing in 3 extra games YSU would give up 15 combined sacks in the playoffs, but that's just my opinion. In terms of rushing offense, Montana State had a very good running offense, and it's awesome that they get their top running back in Adam Jones, and they have some depth pieces that I think could step up behind him and sort of replace what Julius Davis was for the Bobcats last season. But MSU averaged 226.1 rushing yards per game, which ranked 5th, and then YSU averaged 203.4 rushing yards per game, which ranked 12th. Obviously for YSU, a heavy focus on that quarterback run with Beau Brungard. So let's straight up compare these teams now, because again, I don't think the gap is that different. The main difference is the questions on defense for YSU compared to Montana State. So YSU, in my opinion, has the better quarterback in Beau Brungard. I don't think you can really debate that much, especially since Beau won the Walter Payton Award last season, the best quarterback in the FCS. He's so versatile. His legs are almost unbeatable, and I think his passing game it might improve from what it was last season, and I'm excited to see what he does with his new targets. Justin Lamson, though, is also legit a phenomenal quarterback. I talked about how he values taking care of the football. I should have my notes here, but I don't. But I remember Lamson, I think his completion percentage is just ridiculous. So again, I love game managers like that can also extend plays while at the same time making good decisions. You need a quarterback that values possessions. I love that about Montana State. Montana State has the better running back at the moment and the more productive running back. I love Jaden Gilbert. I think he could really have a good season next year, especially if YSU's run blocking continues to perform at the level we saw towards the end of last season. But I do think also for Montana State, they have more production back at wide receiver, right? YSU loses Tom, Zach, and Wilson, but I love the portal additions that YSU brought in. I think there's a lot of talent there. Overall, when you compare last season to this season, I think YSU has a better offensive line, 6 significant contributors back, as I mentioned, while Montana State has 3 full-time starters back. It's a pretty even matchup, honestly, there in terms of offensive line, but I like the fact that YSU seems to be more well-rounded in terms of pass protection and then also running the football. And then we have more depth at tight end with Alex McDonald, Michael Manna, Austin Bray. Montana State's top tight end option obviously is pretty good, but I like the depth that YSU has been able to establish at that position. So right off the bat, you look at the offensive comparison, where's the major difference at? Because to me, it's a pretty even split. I was sort of going back and forth there, sort of comparing these two teams, and there's not that big of a difference. It depends on what you value more when comparing these two teams. On defense, YSU returns more on the defensive front, but again, the Penguins don't have much room to talk in terms of what we did last season on defense. We did not have anything close to what Montana State was able to put on film last season on defense. But Ryan Riemedio, I think, could make some drastic changes. That's sort of the hope for Penguin fans, and that's what next season sort of hinges on. Even that, if our defense holds teams to under 24 points per game and our special teams doesn't make as many critical errors as we did last season, I think we could be golden and have a chance to really take this thing home. Montana State loses its entire starting defensive front and top 3 cornerbacks. I mentioned that at the top of starting this breakdown. I really love the corner they brought in from Penn, sort of a late addition that was just announced on Twitter by none other than Sam Herder. Alec Willis, he has great production. I like their nickelback, Tane Gray. So they have the slight edge in terms of what's coming back because they have a loaded safety room, a loaded linebacking corps. But I think YSU could have a good defensive unit, and I think Ryan Riemedio, the early feel in Youngstown so far is that Coach Riemedio is going to do an excellent job in flipping this unit. So my point is that there seems to be a narrative that Montana State, Montana, and South Dakota State are way better than everyone else in this so-called second tier, as Sam Herder calls it. No disrespect to Sam or the entire national media, but I think NDSU leaving creates so much more parity in the FCS, and I think we are underselling the entire FCS media. A lot of fan bases are underselling the value of other teams. You look at North Dakota, Tarleton State, Villanova. I think those are teams that could push this tier, right? I think there's a lot more balance. And to him, it's broken down into tier 1, tier 2, and there's that clear defined gap. For me, I guess the difference, in my opinion, is I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of those tier 2 teams are able to enter that tier 1 and compete for a national championship. Right now, from my understanding of how Sam described it on his podcast, the tier 2 teams are teams that are good enough to get to the quarterfinal round, maybe the semifinals, but they have no chance of winning the national championship. I have a hard time with how deep that tier 2 is in some of the teams and how they stack up compared to a Montana State, I have a hard time believing that there's not going to be an expanded field of national title contenders. And again, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before on stuff like this. This is more of a national perspective. I'm primarily focused on the Missouri Valley, but I just think, again, I don't think MSU is going to be as good as that 2023 South Dakota State team that just absolutely ran through everybody. And with Montana State being the defending champs, they're going to have that target on their back, and there are going to be a lot of teams that are going to be targeting them, and I don't think Montana State is untouchable. I mean, we just saw right there when I did a roster comparison from Youngstown State to Montana State, the gap was not that large, guys. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. This is a very exciting conversation. I can't wait for football season. We're getting super close already, almost in the month of June. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Penguin Nation Fans Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to leave the show a 5-star review and continue to support the podcast on social media. For now, I'm Gino Leone, and as always, go Gwins.